A lot of the expertise that we hear on the stand today from our experts in the panels and the presentations that we have are only a fraction of small business, and hopefully we can all learn from each other in this process. So let's be, okay, here we go. Go to the crew and get online and tell your story. So now I'm honored to introduce our closing segment before our networking lunch. Kallie and Lindsay Wesley. Kallie and Lindsay Wesley are sisters who decided at the ripe old ages of 22 and 25, respectively, to open their first business. A lifestyle store called Juxtapose in Hyde Park Village. Juxtapose in Hyde Park Village. That's a bit of a tongue twister. 6 years later, they now have 2 stores and employees of their own. Please welcome to the stage Kallie and Lindsay Wesley and their conversation with Senior Executive Vice President of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Suzanne Clark.
Every time I guest lecture at my old alma mater, Georgetown, I am so pleased that I'm not competing against this generation of talent. I mean, it's just I'm so happy to be an old person because I wouldn't want to compete with you ladies. Okay, so we're the only thing standing between these people and a really good lunch. So we got to take this up a notch, right, or we're going to lose them. So here's what I want to know. It's 2011. And you had kind of in the back of your heads that you dreamed of having your own store, but what makes you do it right then?
I had been working at a women's clothing boutique in Kentucky. My sister had just graduated college, and we thought then was the perfect time when we were both able to move to a new place and really dive in and use our creative backgrounds. We always dreamed of having a store. We took every art class we could imagine. We both went to performing arts schools. We love design and fashion, and so it was a natural transition for us to want to have our own business that we could encompass all the things that we grew up loving and that our parents taught us.
So your parents didn't say, wait, what? What'd your parents say?
I think at first, we definitely knew we were going to move to Tampa and start a store. We just kind of dove in a little sooner than we thought. When we originally moved, we were applying for job after job after job, and the location kind of presented itself, which sped up our timeline a lot. But we kept going to boutiques and kept seeing things, and something someone else had said earlier kind of sparked a note. I kind of was like, I can do that. So our timeline kind of sped up. We lived near Hyde Park Village at the time in 2011 when we moved here. And we were walking one day and saw boxes going in and immediately called the leasing office, and a real estate office was going out and Juxtapose went in. So it was a pretty quick timeline.
Remind me why Tampa?
It's young, it's got a great energy, it's transient, so you have your locals, but there's also a lot of tourism and conferences that come to town. So we get to meet new people, our audience changes, but then our snowbirds still come back. And
I think for Lindsay and I too, one thing that we loved about Hyde Park was its charm. In 2011, it was under different ownership at the time, and it was a little different. There's not a lot of business there. At the time, we didn't have neighbors on either side. But we saw its charm, and we knew at some point it would come back. And if anyone's familiar with Hyde Park Village, obviously it's in the middle of a huge revitalization right now, with WS recently purchasing the property. So
you're deliberate people, right? You've gone through school, you have a sense of your likes and dislikes, you have family support, you've deliberately picked Tampa. There had to be a surprise, though, along the way. What has surprised you about this journey?
Well, of course, things pop up that you don't expect. It's all trial and error. We had worked for other people, but we had never worked for ourselves and let every decision that we made affect everything about our lives.
And obviously, we're sisters, so we grew up, working together. But now I'm working for her, and she's working for me. And at the end of the day, it's not, just about disagreeing and then calling our mom and saying, well, Lindsay said this and Kallie said this. You have a business to run, so you have to kind of put on your big girl pants and deal with real life issues. You can't just call on your parents or call on a coworker. I mean, it's just us, and you got to make it work at the end of the day. And it's a lot of trial and error and a lot of problem solving. But One thing I think for Lindsay and I too, we both have art backgrounds. So I was an oil painting major in college, and Lindsay was an art administration and drawing major. So we were used to being around beautiful compositions. So I think one of the biggest misconceptions, especially in retail boutiques, is you have this beautiful art, that you lay out. So you have a little room scene, but it's not always well received from other people. We might see the composition of the clothing racks and say, okay, well, I could go there and put together this outfit, this outfit, this outfit. But you have to think as a retail consumer and not just as an artist or, picking out things that you would want to wear. Well, all of our customers aren't, my sister with the body and the, tall and the height and all that. So you can't just buy for things that you would wear, you would consume. You have to think about your audience.
I think that's so interesting. I loved the Three Daughters Brewery talking about their failures, and thinking about what there is to learn from those failures. And it doesn't have to be failures, it can be that, right? Getting in the mind of your consumer even more, right? So if you were talking to, because we videotape all of these, and I know a lot of people out there when they watch this will be asking themselves, okay, so if I have this dream in some way, what advice would you give them, right? If somebody's sitting there thinking, I have an idea, I can do this, what do you wish you could go back in time to 2011 and have somebody tell you earlier?
I think one of the biggest things that we missed was that Florida doesn't have seasons like Kentucky. So especially with apparel, we kind of overbought for fall. You don't need a sweater right now, which we didn't know at the time. That was just from like a buying inventory perspective, which obviously I don't know if there's any retail boutique owners, but you have to know the climate, which was one thing. And just knowing that your audience might not be the same age as you and might not have the same interest, but you still have to buy products that you can sell and that you love. One thing for Lindsay and I, you're going to be able to sell a product a lot better if you believe in it, if you use it, if, going back to, other keynote speakers said things about values, you have to be able to stand behind the products that you're selling.
It was so interesting. I was telling these women earlier about a panel we did at the DC Summit where we talked a lot about how people had started their businesses and what happened. And we talked to this clothing entrepreneur at the time, and she was telling a story about how she had perfect clothes and she knew exactly who she wanted to dress, right, which was the professional woman. She knew exactly how she wanted to do it, but she was drowning in inventory and they just weren't selling. And she talked about how one day in desperation she just sent out this email to everybody who had ever bought a dress from her and said, can I send you a box of dresses if you can return everything you don't want? And there was such a resounding response to it that it was her biggest retail week in business. And her lesson from that was, I had the right product but the wrong distribution, right? So in thinking about your distribution, since it's storefront, right, what was the decision for you from going from one store to two?
They're relatively close in area. We can drive between them. And then St. Pete, I feel, has a lot more tourism-driven business, and it's very much a walkable community. And Hyde Park is too, but it's not necessarily walking distance to downtown and where all the hotels are. So it was nice to open in St. Pete and have more tourism-based.
So a little bit of a differentiation.
Yeah,
two stores,
it's a different
right?
clientele, yeah.
And did that mean hiring?
Yeah, at the time when we opened our second store, we were 3 years in on our first one, and it kind of was one of those, well, we're ready to grow, but how do we grow? And we hired a manager, and I think that's one of the challenges that Lindsay and I had, if we're talking about, from a hiring perspective. We needed help, and we needed to both be at the second location starting that one, but it's kind of this teetering, like, where do you need to be the most? And I think one challenge we had with hiring a manager is relinquishing control. And I think we realized that we weren't quite ready to relinquish control. So, that was a really hard thing for us to actually have to let go of our manager, because we realized we are the managers, and, it's hiring the right staff, again, going back to values that are going to sell the products that you believe in, but they've got to believe in it too. And I think staffing is definitely a hard thing for us to manage, because we're there. Both of our stores are open 7 days a week and, have 11 hours of open time. You have to be there. Those are per set. In the shopping centers have preset hours. So I think hiring the right staff that wants to work nights and weekends and is going to be there if we can't be. But I think for Lindsay and I, like, we are the face of our business, and we realized sometimes you're going to have to say no to things you want to maybe attend, a wedding or whatever, because you have to be the face of your business.
And we wanted to be in the store during our peak hours where it wasn't necessarily cost effective to have a manager managing while we also overmanaged.
Well, you were there too. How many people in the audience have a family member in their business? We know you people. And so talk about that for a minute. How has it changed your family dynamic? Or do you advise pro or con on doing a business with a family member?
Pro. I mean, we've had a great experience with it. With 2 separate stores where we always ask for each other's input, always. We never make big decisions without one another. So I think that's very important, that we respect one another's opinion enough to not do something without consulting. But also we're not on top of each other each day because we go back and forth between the 2 locations.
I think something about family too is you can always tell them what you're really thinking, which, like, for my personality, I'm a lot more headstrong, I think, than Lindsay is in some aspects. So I'm not really good at relinquishing control, so she can kind of say, okay, you don't know what you're talking about. You're not the smartest person in the room, and let me take the lead on this. I'm stronger in this area, or I'm stronger in that, because we're good at balancing ideas, and at the end of the day, we're sisters, so we have to love each other. We're never going to go away. So, you know, it's a good partnership for us in what we do.
But I think I heard a rumor that it did change something in your personal life. Is that true? Did you start out as roommates too?
Well, we did, but we were also 22 years old, and now
and now she just got engaged. So I don't think it'd be appropriate for me to be all of us cohabitating and living together.
But he's not working in the business.
No.
Actually, he did open the store today.
He did us a favor.
Yeah, he did us a favor.
Oh, that's really funny. Okay,
Yeah.
so here's my question. So at your ages in particular, right, when I imagine, so if I'm trying to imagine being your friend, or sadly, probably your friend's mom, I would imagine that your friends think this is really cool, right? Like, your friends are like, wow, you know, you get to pursue your passion of fashion and design. You get to work with your sister BFF, and, you know, you've really designed your own destiny. And I think the cool parts of what you do are probably easy to imagine, right? When you're having a glass of Prosecco at the end of the day and lean over it to your old college roommate and say, it's not as cool as you think, why is that?
You take your work home with you. And if we make a bad decision in the business, that affects our life, because that's how we support ourselves. And once we leave our shift, when our shift is over, that doesn't necessarily mean that we can turn that off.
And I think too,
it's something we constantly think about.
Yeah, I think expanding off what Lindsay said, it's something that to be a good entrepreneur, you always have to be thinking about what's next. You can't just expect, well, I've got beautiful merchandise, I'm going to open the door, everyone's going to come in, it's going to sell out, and I'm just going to do the same thing again the next day. I think the retail market and the retail environment's changing a lot too. And something I've been noticing a lot is a lot of people want these experiences. So, you know, you have to constantly be reinventing yourself. And you know, sometimes it's exhausting. Sometimes you're like, well, I thought I was doing the right thing, and I thought I was buying the right stuff, and then that product stops selling, and it's just constantly reinventing yourself. So that part can be exhausting. And I think just in general, at least my friends are like, oh, well, your closet must be awesome, or your house must be awesome. And I'm like, I'm working all the time. I don't have time to make my house look pretty too. Like, it's just, you know, you're working all the time.
I think that's, as we've traveled around the country with these summits and others, I think it's the refrain we hear the most often, and probably what I identify the most of when I own my company, which is it's the CEO's job, right? You are just up at night with it. You just live with it all the time. And it's very hard to take a break. It's very hard to emotionally take a break from that business. So you mentioned what's next. You know, when I was thinking about today, when I think about small business generally, what we hear a lot about is access to capital. We hear a lot about, I'd like to open a second store, I'd like to open a second location, I'd like to service a broader radius in my community, but I need the capital to get that started. And I think you had an interesting story about getting additional capital.
So we originally switched over to Square in December of 2012 after a point-of-sale crash. not in a good season, and have that in December. We had already had Square set up because we were using it at pop-up markets and things little events we had done. So we switched over fully, and we were approached by Square, and through Square Capital, we were able to open our second store. They had been kind of following our growth and tracking our sales, and it was a huge blessing. I think we accepted the loan, and after we were approved for it, and signed the lease for our second store the next day. So we kind of just were going through the motions of getting the second store going without even having really the capital to do it yet.
I think it's worth doubling down for a second. I think we might have a video to roll about this because I didn't even know Square had Square Capital. So I think this is an important piece. Can you roll that video?
Juxtapose is a lifestyle store. We sell women's clothing, home furnishing, gifts, accessories.
There's something for everyone here. It's kind of an eclectic mix.
Kallie's the boss. I'm bossy, but I'm not the boss. We have 2 locations, one in Tampa, Florida, and one in St. Petersburg, Florida. We wanted to open a second store. We went to some banks to see if we could apply for a loan. After hearing no, Square was a great outlet for us because it was really the only yes that we got. Square's just given us so much flexibility to be able to open up a second location with Square Capital. They just kind of were there saying, we've seen your growth and here's some capital. It was awesome. I think we clicked yes and it was in our bank account the next morning. They take a percentage of our sales every day and we never have to write a check back. It just automatically pays back on its own. One huge perk of Square, it's really user-friendly. They do a really great job of making everything super simple, super straightforward. Everything's pretty easy and self-explanatory. I trust that Square will have my money in my account the next day. The analytics have helped us kind of figure out what's selling better. Now that we have a second store, I can just check on my iPhone and see even a side-by-side comparison of what both stores are doing at the exact same time in real time. It gives us kind of the freedom to be doing other things without actually being present in the store, but I never have to think about it. I just go about my day. Square's just given us so much flexibility and peace of mind, and we realize how valuable it is for our business. Have a great day. To have Square believe in our business is huge.
No idea. So I would like to turn it over to see if anybody in the audience has a question. Yes, over here.
To increase the company performance, what are 2 to 3 ways you measure what your clientele need and don't need?
Based on what's selling, we picked up certain lines in the beginning that didn't move for us at all, even though we really loved them, and we didn't necessarily want to let them go. If they're not beneficial to our business, then there's no point in holding on to them.
And I think if you're in retail, picking the right point of sale system where you can track your sales. For Lindsay and I don't know if the video you saw all the products that we sell, but we do a little bit of home furnishings, gifts, apparel, a lot of different categories. And so it's also being able to do the right point of sale system to track what sells when. And I actually had a friend who owned a retail store tell me to keep a little journal. I mean, obviously your point of sale system can do this as well, but it's nice to know, like, if you have an open calendar, to take a little note, like, for some reason, November 15th, I sold XYZ and a lot of it. Then you go back the next buying season and you can kind of keep track of what's selling when. And I think that's something that's really important in our first year. It's something that we really tried to go into the next year looking back. What you're doing it right off the bat, it's really trusting your gut to know and what products you're buying.
It's a good question. Other questions? Yes.
What would you do differently if you could start over? What would you do differently if you could start over today?
Oh, gosh.
Well, if we could start over today, we would know what didn't work at first. We wouldn't buy those items again.
I think, too, we absolutely love having a second store. I think I would have never have changed diving in the way we did with the first location. But I have friends who have first locations in the Tampa community, and they're wondering if they should open the second one. And I think that for Lindsay and I, now looking back in retrospect, I think we were a little premature, just a little bit opening the second one. I wish we had another year under our belt to be able to really get both to where they needed to, or get the first one to really where it needed to be. But again, you know, you never know what's going to be in the future. So we had no idea that Hyde Park was going to go through a major revitalization. You know, we have no idea what street's closing on in St. Pete when. You know, we don't know when valet parking is going to go away, or, you know, the parking garage is going to be used for a Rays game. I mean, you never know. So I think that's a great question, and Lindsay and I are kind of more let's roll with it kind of people. So we're more problem solving versus kind of looking back in retrospect, because with small business, you have to just keep thinking about the next day.
Mm-hmm. That's a great quote. I hope somebody on my team wrote that down. We're going to use that quote. Blueberry Farm.
Yeah. Burge Siggety with Bison and Investments here in Tampa. In the earlier panel, there was some discussion about problems in how you get skilled people to help you. And you clearly have a look and a dream that you're accomplishing. You look like you're really good together, by the way. I would say that just as somebody in the audience. But talk a little bit about your employees, because somebody is back there at your shops right now, and they're the front line, and hopefully they're selling the merchandise and giving the customer that experience, which clearly you would have if you were dealing with the two of you.
I mean, finding the right employees is really hard for us because it goes beyond, like I said, just selling pretty things. I think for us, we've kind of found a niche with hiring people who are in college or about to be in college, just from a maturity level. It's hard to find, you know, young moms or people who have free time during the day because they want to work when they want to work. And that's the number one issue that we have with staffing is, well, you don't get to work when you want to work, otherwise it's not a job.
And we want to be there during the day.
And we want to be there. Yeah, I mean, our core people that shop with us know when we're in the store, and they want to see our face and shop with us. So I think from a staffing perspective, I have an interview process, but a lot of it's trial and error. And I've had the great fortune of, in Hyde Park, not having the issue of having to let people go, because that's always a really tough conversation to have. But I have had to do it. And I think for us, it's going back to what someone else said, it's when your visions don't line up. When you get a call, there's nothing more like a knife in the heart when you get a call from a customer that says, I had this experience, and you're just like, oh God, you never know. You go back in your mind, what if they had that experience with someone else, and then they're never going to come back? So I think especially in small business, you have one chance to make a first impression, and if that first impression and that first experience is not great, they might not come back. And so it's finding the right people that are personable and that can feel comfortable in their own skin enough to approach someone, to ask how their day is. And, I think just having the personality to stand behind the products you sell.
Someone who's not going to take the easy way out and just say, I don't know, but will go the extra mile to get the answer for the customer, or call one of us when they don't know. And not everybody's willing to do that, or just won't.
I think what's so interesting about hearing you talk, right, is I remember when I went to business school, and everybody thought, all my classmates and I thought, that the big classes were going to be strategy and finance and ops, and all these quant classes were going to be what really drove a business. And then it turns out in your entire career that it's all people, right? That it's all organizational development, organizational behavior, and all of that work. It's so interesting. Well, I think we started today talking about dreamers and doers, right? And I think you're a great example of people who had a dream and then figured out how to do it. And it's been a pleasure to get to know you both. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kallie and Lindsay, for coming to the stage and sharing your experience with us. Hearing those heartfelt stories of achievements and failures, they're inspiring to us all in small business. And I think that's the spirit of what we wanted to accomplish today by bringing all those people together. Thank you for sharing your story. That concludes our speaking portion of the program today, but I do want to give out our last two giveaway winners, the final square stand and the iPad donated by T-Mobile. I will not embarrass you, Melody, so I will take the cards from you. All right. The last two giveaways are the square stand goes to Victoria Jurgensen. Victoria Jurgensen. #creative. And the iPad donated by T-Mobile with 1 month of free service goes to Francisco Gandia. Francisco Gandia. All right. Thank you so much. Thanks to all of our sponsors, the Greater Tampa Chamber of Commerce for hosting this program. It's time for lunch. I hear the food is pretty good. So stick around, network, and get a bite to eat. And thank you all for attending, and do some networking.